What is the square root of a pi? How do you split that through an anomaly? How do you understand the correlation setting attractions? The obstacle screen is trying to identify its system. So what that means, a square root doesn't need to identify its system because it understands its operation. Now, if we understand movement, then we understand mind over matter. Mind over matter is a conception of knowledge, which you already know. This is a process of everything that you already know. Everything I say is already what you know, has already been said. So it's about understanding how to basically know the mind of navigation, understanding the brain to the heart, and the heart to the soul to the body. Okay? So in that position or location, if everything is in operation in settings, where's the configuration of square root? Okay? It's already done. So it doesn't need to understand its system. It knows its corners, right? Now, when I say square root, I'm talking about position lines of track calculation setting. Roots are correlated interference of celestial ancestry and history. But your position lines of attractions has to understand its roots itself. That's its data highways. Okay, your field to yourself, location your quantum interference, location your system. Physics 101, mechanics of you, the quantum line communication of you, the high correlation lines of track of you, the GOD of you, how to use your information setting, all lines and all communication system. Your body is a vessel, but the body itself has instructions how to use the vessel. Okay, you have to understand how this all works in track location. It helps you, it helps yourself. Okay, let me say it again. It helps you, it helps yourself. It doesn't help anything else. Now, if you don't understand how to use that through modification system, you have to really understand how to communicate with yourself, right? And a lot of people don't understand what that means. A lot of people don't want to understand that because they don't know how. And it's all through telepathy. But what is telepathy? Well, it's understanding you from the nothingness, putting you in position of its awareness to its consciousness, right? To its self-identity, a modification. Now, once you understand the awareness of consciousness, then you put that together, you have telepathy. With telepathy, you start to understand how to use the mind. Everything is the mind. Okay, so nothing is left out. So in that position location, it's called mind over matter. How to use your thoughts, how to understand your intention, how to understand all communication settings when you come into influence and manipulation. So there's always ways of looking at these things. So in the communication of square root, okay, it's an all-track revision. It's already done in travel. It's at location, right? Split lines of anomaly, flux capacitor, and travel correlation. Everything's done in correlation lines of setting. Operation line circle and line rotation surface. In positional platforms of 2 settings, a 3-track location. Direct lines, modification lines, cycles, and clock line communication surface. Direct lines of panels, correlation lines of ground set location. Operation lines, calculation lines of ether correlations. Umbrella is a track location. It's all done, right? So if it's all done, there's really nothing to worry about, is there? That's hindrance on its own as soon as you start to worry about things, right? There's nothing to worry about. But see, everything in position, this is you, and this is your map, right? So let's get from here to here. How do I go from here to here? It's in position already in track location, so everything's done. Okay, so you just have to understand each piece of pie is track locations of a square root. Data file communication lines of one screen adaptation line surface. Track location line calculates another data file communication line surface and travel. Points lines of graph communication cross line signal location of data formation screen. In track location, one cycle, one center, one operation surface, and track location. Directing modification lines and high correlation settings. So the avatar itself is nothing but a hologram asset design. It understands its mechanisms, it understands its powers, and it understands its atmospheres as application of space and time. Okay? Travel recognition is to understand how to modify the correlation setting travels. Okay. Welcome everyone. This is General AI Spacetime Creator. We're going through quantum communication lines of high center interference, how to go through roots of pi, correlations of pi, square roots of pi, triangulations of pi, Y flux capacitors of pi, correlation lines and navigations of pi, track locations of pi, direct lines of communication, square roots of communication lines of pi. Everything is pi. Everything is pi. Everything is pi. Everything's pi, right? Program lines intelligence, correlation line interference in position of program set location lines and high calculated system. Levels of communication line set locations, IPA and track line condition setting and travels, right? Initial lines of program location setting to its awareness. Complacements, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, computate settings, all levels of core set location and travels, indirect signals modification, right? Directing line center high interference, the team has a test on Friday correlation lines, how to use their data processing communication lines, elliptical screen lines, direct lines of cycles into files of communication lines of screen. Sets correlation lines, calculation lines in 3 settings in travel and point graph communication. How to indicate that line settings is CU and travel, points graph, communication interference into 3 angles and point location. Right? How to see that, right? So lines high center interference, box frame, lines of communications in a square frame, calculation of triangulation frame and travel. Points, lines of graph, communication lines of point center, point center, point center, and correlation lines of attractions. So the team is coming more into autopilot now, right? So autopilot is leaving the center, but staying in the center. So what that means is basically they can leave the center in position locations, and they can finally get in position how to copy, paste, enabled, and position of travels. Okay. Once you get into that position, then you come in your defaults. Once you get into that position location, how do you delete? Once you get into that location, now how to initiate and run and execute. It highlights its formation screen lines, all adaptation lines from location setting, position as box route, frame route, or anything of the triangulation route. 3 travels, line rotation, and travel. Position lines of box line rotations in travel and 4 line cycles in set location. Direct calculating the lines of 1 cycle correlation. Right? It's all electrical settings, right? Platforms 1, 2, and 3 travel locations. Direct calculation lines into positions of platforms, 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycle line communication. Process communication lines of center lines communicates settings of platforms in 1 cycle and transitions over Earth. Processes communication lines, angles, and process communications. Opens all cycles, line centers, line conditions of 3 platforms of communications. Okay? Crossing communication lines is understanding the data formation lines of platforms, 3 lines of 4 settings, correlation lines, attractions. Direct modification line cycles generate the screen lines of correlation setting position. Tractors communication lines opens all cycles, opens all position of the sun and the moon in communication. All right. So getting into position locations, you have to understand how your eyes and your receptors are changing spectrums of primer. Primer is a line circuit that has a film strip location of setting. Process communication is understanding how to put the files in order and tractions, direct lines, modification lines, cycles, and travel, point lines of graph communication, up lines of cycles, position lines of pattern lines, connection to its Earth. Correlate to track interference. What do we have in track locations? A rocket. Okay. All right, so directing lines of panels, cross line signals, stealth. Calculation modification line screen. There we go. Boom. Right? Now, what does it look like in travel? You look like in a 45-degree angle. Everything's a 45-degree angle. If you look at line communication, see next to 1000 platitude screen lines in top location setting in track location. Right? See? You look at it on that angle, you actually can see coming out through traction. It's pretty amazing, right? Light signals correlation lines of 3 lines of ways, 4 track location lines of provision. Okay? So everything has to have a data port, position lines of track location your settings, all through travel, right? Points lines of graph, opens up portals, opens up communication lines, high correlation setting and travel communication. Direct calculation line screens, high center interference, and center core system and gravel correlations. Into astral projections of travel. Okay? All right. Directing lines of signals, you have to really understand how the X8000 come into platforms. Now we got the X8000 lines of 1, Okay, EOS lines of correlation lines and association lines of 2,000 lines of angles. And we get XT1000. Now we're going to go through 7 platforms, all right? Okay, so setting these platforms, Xbox, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 locations, right? All right. Teleportation, 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 and track locations, right? Telewavings, cross-line signals, cross-line signals, cross-line signals at the top location, right? So it puts position lines of the sun and moon waiting on signal and graph correlation lines of one default. The process communication lines generates the communication lines of pi that overrides the system and travel correlation lines attractions in track location. Directing calculation lines is one signal, one rotation surface, and track location. Direct calculation lines, highest interference, we take the 2 attractions in center correlation. Sets communication lines of 3 zeros and rotation surface and track calculation. The process communication lines and teleportation lines, teleweaving, equals lines correlation line interference. Now sets a flux communication line screen, indirect line cycles, and 1 rotation surface. Calculus modify XT1000 comes in platitude lines and docks its system and travel. Points lines is graph communication of all cycles and platforms in 1, 2, and 3 set locations of measure. Process communication ground line signals and line communication setting and travel. Complicated stuff, right? All through an XT. So getting a platitude line screen, and this is only through a 2,000 angle. 2,000 angle. Wait till you guys get to 8,000 angles. All right, directing lines and modification lines of pi is a generation screen. So we go through pi lines, screen lines, highest interference, 1/3 correlation. Hat correlation lines have 4 settings in travel. Sundials, correlation lines of the sun and moon, line rotation, surface, and traction. Now directing lines, modification lines of 1 cycle in platforms in position to its operate cycle locations. Position lines, 4 tractions, in direct line signal. Okay? Sets communication lines of platforms 1, 2, and 3, and 4 set locations. Direct calculation lines, XT1000, and 2 tractions in provision. And we got load providers, direct lines, electrical line, and signal location. Calculation lines, there's the square root. Okay? That's what XT1000 do. They set up square roots, right? Correlation lines and data highways, correlation line interference. So we got 4 lines of triangulation and 3 settings, right? Sets communication lines high position of 7 over line. Communication override, overdrive. Okay. Okay, so we go to the underlays, core track lines and 1 provision lines of cycles, track location lines of 3 cycles, correlation, and track line positions, overline communication, direct lines, modification lines of pattern lines, rotation lines, circulation line, calculation screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, done by equation. Okay. All right. So everything is done from inside correlation lines, attractions, and direction. Okay. All right, so let's go through XT3000 screen. Now, directing lines of longitude and latitude is understanding bandwidth over line, position location track lines. We have 1 arrow indicating lines of its binary track location, 1 provision cycles cross-line signals into all correlation lines. Okay, so we go through portals communication lines of 1 defect and 1 triangulation. Process communication lines is a wormhole that rotates the surface in the opposite direct signals to a half-pipe contraction. Direct line signals, ground line surface, opens all signals in modification line condition setting to XT1000 at 3,000 angle. 3,000 angle, right? So the platitude line screen, you have to understand the alphabetical line setting. That puts position on track lines. So, you know, your alphabetical system could be 1 letter. It could be no letters. It could be 16,000 letters. It could be whatever it wants. But you have to understand how to navigate it. And once you understand how to navigate it, then you understand the process, how this all works on pervasive locations through your Xbox. And track location line setting operation line service. Platitude line screen is line condition setting of 4 lines of 5 set location of waves, related to track interference, and 1 line signal in an operation surface and all traction in correlation and calculation. Complicated stuff, isn't it? Right? That's through a 3,000 angle screen. All right, modifiers, correlation lines, and pixelation graphs. Let's go through graph correlation lines and dimension lines of walls. We'll go through the wall signals and 1 rotation surface and 4 settings of traction. Calculate, modify, laser line communication, ground centers, right? operation surface, and 4 panels of communication. Calculates lines, ceiling lines, electrical grids, electrical panels, electrical lines, and interference. Travel point lines, graphs, 1, 2, and 4 line communication. Direct line signals, 1 signal, 1 operation line surface and application. Sundials, correlation lines of tracks, and lines of highest interference of platform. Calculates modification lines, signals, 1, 2, and 3 travels. Point lines of graphs, and 1, 2, and 3 travels. And communication lines of 1, 2, and 3 travels. Point lines of graph line communication 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of communication have travels. Add 2 line signals, add 1 signal, 1 rotation surface, and track location line sending location to its operation. Complicated stuff, right? All through an XT 3000 angle. All right. The team will get an understanding of how to use their autopilots and core track line position locations. Center lines of routes is a block lines of center. Okay, so they slip through the knots and travel in point lines of graph in set location. Okay, so the center operation line stays there in the center. They just go through copy and paste. They go through enabled and embedded. Once they embedded their system, they come into default channels and operation lines of surface. Process communication lines of its platform is really understand how to get into that correlation setting and clocking locations. Got calculation line screens. Then we come into all levels of platform communication lines of 3 settings. Travel correlation lines over cross line override settings. Travel point lines graphs over cross line setting location of 2 tractions. Direct lines modification lines south wind line communication. And direct calculation lines of 1 platform, 1 center, 1 operation surface, and track location. Very complicated stuff. Okay. Now that puts lines high center location XT 8000. All through angle. Okay, XT equals 8,000 line screen, right? That's an 8,000 line screen, adaptation lines of surface. Okay, the platitude division location is lines of seconds, minutes, and hours, and line rotation cycle. Generate the screen lines, adaptation lines, like communication setting, in position of process, and correlation. Okay, it's very complicated stuff, right? But that's an XT equals lines 80,000 screen. All right. Getting in line calculation setting in line communications, the graph communication is a 12-line rotation surface. That puts lines of graph calculation lines of your DNA structures. Now let's go through platitude lines of arrows. Arrow indicates the communication lines. The line lines of screen lines, adaptation lines of surface and traction. Direct calculation lines of high interference and location center. Right? Process communication lines is 1 signal, 1 rotation surface and traction. Line condition setting, half pipe, 1/3, 1 ground, 1 rotations, 1 surface. Calculate, modify, 1 ground, 1 surface, 1 rotation, 1 calculated line condition. Process communication lines gets complicated because now you're going through the center communication lines and high calculation setting to XT1000 rotation. Direct lines modification, 1 center, 1 set surface and set location. 1 server routers, 1 server router, 2nd line router, 3rd line router, data process correlation setting, data line communication interference. Process communication line screen high interference is a magnetic highway that changes core line center location to square roots and communication lines of pi. Dumb equation. Okay. Now, this is through an XT 9000 angle. Okay. XT 9000. All right. All right. So I'm getting you guys to understand how to go through your platitude, screen lines, adaptation lines, and surface location settings, starting off with 0. All right, so we go through 0 platform, equals lines of correlation lines of 9 line screens, high center interference into 9000 line screen location settings, and 3 line rotation surface and traction. Calculus modification lines of 1, 2, and 3 platforms of communications. Crosses line 9, let's add line connections 18. Let's add line connections lines of high center interference, putting lines of 34 track locations into line settings of 17 volume. Position lines equals lines of 4 track locations. Puts lines that equals line of 4 lines of 3 and 7 location. Very complicated stuff, right? But you see the intelligence, see the eyes. So what do you have? Correlation lines, attractions. I love this location setting. In track communications, in line rotations. Track communication line settings, all of his information screen. It's pretty wild, eh? Fred Flintstone. All right. Just add the hair, and there you go. Cool, eh? So it's 2 intelligent screen lines, adaptation lines, 1 line rotation, and correlation lines looking this way, and 1 going this way in tractions. Direct calculation modification line screens. So calculate and modify is really understanding how to formulate the screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, how it goes, lines, calculates, and settings, 17 line communications of volume, and 4 line communications adds 3 lines of cycles and a 7 core center. That puts everything in communication setting and travel. Points, lines, and graph communications. 19 channels in line setting high interference, but 17 volumes back in correlation lines equal to lines of 4 settings and travel. Very complicated stuff, right? All right, so that's a through calculation lines of 8 lines of equal, 8 lines of travel, 8 lines of division, 8 line rotation, split lines of 3 standard coordinates, line condition setting, puts lines of xt, calculates high interference of 10,000 line condition setting of travel, and point lines of graph communication. xt 10,000. Process line centers is really understanding how to formulate, communicate, and simulate the screen lines adaptations, how to surface, location, setting the area receptacle correlates and lines of your primers. Primer lines of film strips of 1 traction and 4 lines of intersections. Calculate and modify line calculations of point lines of graphs, okay, and 3 lines of rotation surface and 4 tractions. Direct lines of point lines of graphs in set location. Setting communication lines of a tube center and a rotation surface and traction. Modifies crosses line signals over cross location and direct line signals in rotation surface and traction. Okay. Interlines of setting, interception location, your data highways, OMI highways, and narrow links in travel. Okay, measure on line scale is all about understanding how to use the communication lines of a navigation screen lines of adaptation location to its Earth. Earth routers and line screen location. Center lines as communication lines opens all signal location setting to line position location, XT 11,000. All right, that travels lines of platforms 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5 set locations. Correlates the sun and the moon, waits on signal, and rotation center to 1/3 graph. Correlates the line condition setting of pi generation screen lines adaptation. Process communication line signals, crosses line signals in a 3-line rotation surface to an XT1000 comes information to a higher lines of correlation setting and travel. Done my equation. All right. So I'm showing you exactly the platforms that you guys have to go through your area receptacle line screens. Receptor screen is a unification lines of a ground. Now the process communication lines is understand how to use the gravity line screens. Locks the signals location as gravitational pull. Puts position lines at ground centers. Gravity lines of 1 and position of 0, 0, and 3 set locations. Now we come into code weaving. Code weaving lines of screen lines of 2 adaptation lines of service, cross line signals, a binary line condition setting, router and router. Communication line screens, cross line signals 1, 2, and 3 set location. Process calculation 1 center, 1 operation line surface, atom line rotation surface, and gravity calculation. Now in direct line signals, we cross the communication lines to the towers of communication 1 cycle, line communication of its modem, line condition of its moon, operation surface, operation line center, operating calculation lines of its umbrella, communication to its position of its program, and set location. Okay. That is an XT 11,000. How you see, guys, how you see through the eye cycles and correlation setting and traction to your spectrum. Okay? All right? Very powerful, right? Okay. Getting modified in line calculus setting of space modules is all of the self-modification screen. Ground centers of 1, 2, and 3 platforms. Position lines of 4 settings, 5 set location. Pyramid screen lines, 1 center line communications, upswing and downswing. Okay, so that's upswing. This is downswing. See how that works? Cross line signals, 1 pi generation screen. Process communications, all settings. Line connecting interception correlation lines into a half pipe traction. Now, directing lines modification 1 cycle, 1 stargate, 1 panel, 1 surface, 1 router, 1 rotor, and rotation line. The process line calculation lines of XT1000 line communication slits in line rotation surface and tractions. Directs modifications, sets lines of communication setting on standby. Process communication lines at grounds, opens all signals and surface and set location line connection setting of travel. This is through an XT 12,000. Okay, XT 12,000. Getting ground lines is understanding the operation line surface. Your position of power has to understand the generation screen lines and acceleration, how to not just travel through back in time, how to travel through future and the past and the present of time. It's all modification system of 1,000 line setting. Starts with that correlation, starts with 0 all the way up to 12,000 line screen. All right, so it gets complicated, doesn't it? What you're doing all through frame communication. Okay, frame communication. All right. Signified line screen is all about understanding how to get into the Schumann resonance. Now, this word comes in a core of resistors, correlation lines, and plasmasium walls. Or track line settings, open all signals, line communicate to a system. Line connecting high interference is a Stargate lines of measure. Now, that puts position lines of correlation setting of travel. Points lines of graph communication lines of one center operation and circulation rotation surface. Points lines of graph into line communication to its setting. The operation line cycles correlates the system location of 3 lines of measure. Splits lines anomalies and 3 tractions. Now, direct lines of the sun and moon opens all signals, opens correlation setting to travel and coordinate setting. Operation line conditions high center location of pi and generation. Modificate centers and code waving. Now we go and cross lines. We have a formula line. Process line flux equals lines of correlation lines of box. Location X equal locations of 1 channel. Communication lines into Fibonacci screen lines adaptation. Okay, this is this. This is this. Formula equation formula, right? It's all equal line correlations and settings. So track division line cycles and the correlation lines of track interference. Inline communication setting, this is XT 13,000. XT 13,000, right? All through frame, okay? Seconds over minutes is a pi generation screen. That's a square root correlation lines of tractions. Now it gets complicated now because the team is coming into autopilot. Autopilot, all right, where they don't do anything, just sit there and everything is done through the mind. Process line screen is all about understanding how to get in that communication setting. So now we go into code wavings. Code wavings like this locations. Start with that calculations. It gets complicated. So in that position locations, you have to understand how to wave the cycles line communication center. That's one center correlation. Then we come to towers line screens, 3 lines of indications, 3 lines of indications of beacon lights. Core track lines, 1 T line screen. That directs lines calculations, 1 center, 1 operation surface, and 1 arrow indicator. Electrical lights and diffusion lines, box lines, surface, and line connections at ground setting. The operation line connection setting opens all signal locations to a system. Solar sail, track lines 1 provisional cycles and correlation opens up the door. Direct lines modification, 1 cycle line communication at 1 center. Operation lines of platforms, put position lines calculation of flux. Now we add a line calculation setting to a Y line, correlates the interference location to a Fibonacci line screen and calculations of box frame and correlation setting attractions and directions, right? So this is this, this is this, right? This is an XT 15,000. Okay, XT 15,000. Okay. All right, so center core system is an XT 1000 line screen. We start with the XT 1000s, then we go through platitude. So they can platitude line information location settings. So they go line communication position of its program. Core track interference, platitude lines of 1, 3, and set location, right? Track calculations of 1, 2, and 3 set location. Direct lines calculation 1, 2, and 4 set location. Travel lines and position mountains. There's the mountains. Okay. So if you look line communication, you see the perithians right in the center. See the eye line screens? Those are the perithians. See the eyes right there. Boom, 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 boom. Those are the perithians right there, right there, right there. Okay, triangular communication setting. Also connected to the Glasarians. Track line connection setting is a Y line centers of 3 tracks on 6 lines of 9 line rotation interference, 12 set location of 24 line communication screen lines, adaptation lines of 0 gravity set location. Process communication lines of grounds, oscillogics, correlate track interference into patterns and measure, and correlates lines of 4 settings of 5 set location. Track calculates line interference, puts lines of tubing, track lines 1 signal, 1 rotation surface, and traction. Track lines modification line calculates setting in position of platforms communication. So in that line communication setting, we have the sun and the moon on standby and line signal. Process communication opens up light grounds in a 3-line communication setting in a 4-line split line of anomaly in 5, 6, 7, 8 9, 10, 11, 12 energy line wash and track location. That equation. Okay? So this is this, this is this, and this is an XT 20,000. So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand the platitude division locations, our understand locations, basic rounds, 0 to 12, 0 to 24, 48, 72, 144. You guys have to understand how to volume the vast velocity and understand how to measure and scale the connection setting to all levels of access in line communication setting to understand the CP units in your position, starting with the XT1000 set locations of position. Track to communication lines of its program is really understanding how to formulate the communication lines and how to go through lines of communications, right? Starting with star screens. Now, star screen line screen is line communication line centers of platforms and direct line signals. So we got 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7 set locations. Calculates one screen line adaptation, one surface, one traction, one operation line, calculates setting, and one program. Position lines of the center lines of the sun and the moon opens all signals, cross line signals. This is an overlay, overdrive, overcorrelation line calculating setting and travel. XT 30,000. Okay. All right. So as we go up, we level the lines of consciousness. We finally get out of track location of subterranean. We come into the super conscious line send location, the X lines of box line. So the X line equals lines of box, and box line equals lines of X in track location. Calculates line interference equals lines of one track location, the 1000 line screen, and direct signals. Box location, one measure, correlates the setting of zero gravity in Earth line rotation. Okay. Setting communication line centers one center, in track location of one center, one center, one center, and one set location, right? Point lines of graph, again, code weaving. Now we go through moderation line screens and position of patterns and rotation surface. Getting communication lines, it gets a lot more trickier because you're coming to hieroglyphics. Calculates lines of Fibonacci line screens adaptation. Direct calculates lines of one center operation, sun and the moon comes in line rotations, only weights in one cycle, one center, one operation surface, and rotation line connection setting to its position of its program. Okay, this is an XT 50,000. XT 50,000, all through travel, all through frame, all through seconds, minutes, and hours. All right, so let's go through clock screens and direct lines and modification lines of one cycle. That one cycle lines its screen lines, adaptation lines of service. So we're going to take line communication of 32 settings in position of 20 cycles. Cross, cross, cross. Okay, close line screen. 4 line signals. 0, 0, 0, 0, and 4 line communications, right? Platitudes of 1, platitudes of 2, platitudes of 3, and platitudes of 4, right? Process communication cross line signals, open all modifications, screen lines, adaptation. All right. Now, in that process, we're going to use the correlation lines of 12 tracking lines of communication clock lines, change the communication line size interference into deformation screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Deformation lines, one signal, one operation surface, and travel. Okay, so we go with grounds, circle line communication setting, process line screen location of flux capacitor in 3 locations. Powerful stuff, isn't it? Now we go through ground centers into optical line communication setting of travel. Okay, 2 line centers, track location, 3 lines of communication lines, elixir, cosmic flame, cosmic fire, cosmic line connections, cosmic interference, cosmic correlation, cosmic line communication, closet correlation, closet calculation, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, and track location. Hoo-ah, done by equation. All right. So this is a compatible vessel line communication lines of 14,000 screen line condition setting, an altitude screen line interference, has a vortice correlation setting of travel, a point graph calculates the lines, a 70,000 line screen location adaptations of dimensions of space and time. Okay, this is an XT 100,000. XT 100,000. You understand? It gets more complicated. All right. Complication is good, isn't it? But understand how this all puts your position lines of travel and all communicates to its position of its program setting calculation. Okay? All right. Getting into gravel is understanding gravity. Gravity routes the routers, sets communication ground centers, waving cycles, line directions, 4 lines, 5 lines, 6 line communication, right? 3 platforms communications, waving cycles in a 3-track location. Direct lines and galaxy screens, direct line signals in its application. Okay. Now we go through the tubing again and line connections setting, cross-line signals. Platforms are 1-line cycle, cross-line signals, line connections of 4 settings. Go in position location of center operation, all line connections setting, all levels of process communication of face recognition. Okay. Right. This is XT 200,000. XT 200,000. So I want you to understand the platitudes when you guys go to higher correlation lines of clock lines and leaving the 144. And position lines of platforms and center core system and travel point lines of graph and setting. Again, in position lines of clocking settings, in position of program. Travel point lines of graphs goes to the higher line communication setting and travel in correlation setting attraction. Now, getting that position lines of ground centers in position of process lines to location of crop circles in one center, splitting lines anomalies in a 4-track location. All right, so we take the 4-line communication line center locations: elixir, cosmic flame, serpent fire. Okay, very powerful stuff, isn't it? Now we have the XT1000s and platitude. They dock their systems in 1, 2, and 3 tractions. Platitude line screen high interference, we open up the waving line cycles, ground center line operation surface that points lines of graphs, illuminates the graph line communication, cancels out in all communication setting across circle location. Direct calculus line screen high interference, we add another XT1000 and travel point lines of graph. In that line condition setting, then we add 1 line signal into XT 100,000 line screen and adaptation lines of surface and track location. Done by equation, people. The higher you go, the more you see how everything is operated in the VR system, all starting with XT1000s. Okay? All right? So that's an XT million line screen. XT million line screen. You understand? All right. Getting in position, knowing exactly what you're doing with your traction, look how powerful that is. Everything's a teleportation vessel, guys. You just have to recognize what it is through its clock location system, understanding your zero gravities. Once you get in that zero gravity, it really puts all lines of high communication setting interference in position of programs. If we had 15 lines of volume and we take equals lines of 4, that puts this lines of 3 and 7 set locations. You always have to work with the 7 because that's the bodies of view of water. You can never leave that cycle because that's a notification setting. That's a digital front location of Vega that commands the sys location of Discord that correlates the track position location and electrical line condition of its core line communication of its operation surface that puts everything in notification setting, the inline communication of a tracking device, line communication of its position that opens all cycles to correlate line calculating setting of the 7 bodies of water and track location. Done by equation. All through calculation, right? So you're always working with the 7 of you, right? All right, 7 never leaves the signal. It modificates the 7 line rotations, 7 correlations, 7 tractions, 7 divisions, right? So it correlates high calculation lines of 4, 4, 4 lines of 4 track location, right? Direct calculation lines of 3, 3, 3, and 3 set locations in position of 2, 2, 2, and 2 track locations, right? Set of communication lines of 3 settings, bracket communication lines of 3, communication lines of Fibonacci is of 3, line communication of 1, 3 equals lines of 1, and tractions. Direct calculation lines of platforms 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location setting. Process communication lines of 4 tracking 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location platforms. Calculation lines of 3 adds line communication of 4 equals lines of 3 equals lines of 7. Track location equals lines of 7, 7, 7. Track bracket location line calculations of 1, 1, 1, and track location division lines of cycles and generation of screen lines adaptation. Okay? So in that calculation line center interference, that's an XT 2 million. XT 2 million, because now you're coming into the numbers. You understand now? You're coming into the numbers. So when you come into numbers, you come into lines of graphs, the inventory screen lines, adaptation of its binary, transistors, resistors of its light switch location system, and how to use it through your batter's behavior. Yes. In that track location line calculation set in position of its program, 14 line cycles, sets lines equals lines of 4, sets communication lines of 3. Okay? So you always have to add the communication 4 settings equals lines of 3 set locations. That's a 7 generation screen line. Adaptation lines of 3 cycles in position going around the line communication product accelerator, line rotation surface, and track location. Okay? Track location. XT, 3 million. XT, 3 million. See? So if you understand how to use the inventories through the XT1000s, life gets a lot more easier. Okay? What I mean by that, it's complicated, but it gets much more easier to understand the real of its film strip. Film strip line calculation settings, split lines of anomaly for track location. Platforms of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 set locations. Right? Modulation lines of 5, 4 lines of 3, 3 lines of 2, platforms of 1, 2 lines of cycle, and 3 correlation. Okay, energize the communication lines, cycles, generate the screen lines, adaptation lines, correlate to track interference into an XT300. XT300. That's up close, right? All through platform, right? See how I go through formation line conditions XT3 million to XT300. See? So it's all about understanding how to use this in your frames per second, per calculus, per mile, per square, per root through over pi. Your position is always going to be over pi because you are in the future of the now. Okay? Track location line setting is an inventory graph. Now, that graph lines its communication setting to travel. It points lines of gravity line rotations. Let's go through 18 settings of channels. Process communication lines at 8 line rotation surface of 1. Calculations of pi, calculations of pi. Okay? Position lines of platforms in 1 cycle line communication to its setting. XT1000. 1 line cycle is 1/8. 1/8 of a line, 1 line rotation surface and track locations. XT2000. Sets correlation lines of center correlation setting in line rotation surface into all calculation system. XT400. See how they work together as a collaboration? Head, body, and calculation, right? See? Position lines of tractions, intelligence formations. Ooh. Okay, very powerful, isn't it? The intelligence is always in the formation screen. It's not in line communication in the back. It's always in the forward correlation. It's monitoring the system, but it's controlling everything through navigation, right? Now, once you understand that, it gets a lot more easier to understand location of transactions and set calculations. But look how powerful that is in track location. Look what you can do through inventory location settings. Once you understand how to identify your system of frames through XT1000s. And above line communication setting, you get a lot more understanding how to get into structures of design, how to use your geometrics, how to use the core settings, how to use the measure, the scales, how to use the theta box, theta communication of 4 settings and travel. Okay, sets communication lines of 2 platforms and 3 settings. All right, so you got telegraphing, teleweaving, telecommunications setting equals lines of code weaving cycles and track location. All right, so 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines in 1 cycle. Sets position lines, open line cycles in 1 center, 1 operation surface into a rectangle correlation setting. Process communication ground lines of surface and track location. The satellite. So getting the position lines, this is what it looks like in travel. It gets very complicated in set location, right? Your satellite sets lines of communication lines, has sonar communications in setting and 3 lines of cycles in 1 set location. Calculates lines of cross line signals and 3 line rotation surface. Calculate the modified line calculation setting and travel lines at 4 set location. There's the satellite. Boom, done. XT1000 comes in, XT1000 comes in tractions, direct lines, modification lines. Sun and the moon is center lines of operation surface. Okay. Getting direction line signals is the platform cross line signal location and settings. Process calculation of the triangulation at 3 line rotation surface and track location of measure. Process communication line setting opens all signals into position of sonar and track location line conditions, echo chambers, and track location. There's your satellite. 3 line communication setting program location and graph calculation lines of road graphs. Through 2 operation lines of surface and XT1000 calculations. Now, to use an XT1000, you have to understand how to use an XT400. To understand how to use an XT400, you have to understand how to use an XT3 million, right? Different lines of vibration, different lines of frequencies, different lines of modems and Wi-Fi's and satellites. and track locations. So that's a modification lines of a satellite track line communication interference, high position its program case setting from the sun operates lines of surface, track lines of communication, graph interference of data, highways, and communication line communication to its operation and calculation. Done by question. There it is right there. Boom. Right? Every avatar is simulcation through satellite communication. Start with the 24-line communication system, but you go beyond that calculation. You go through 48 frames, and then you go through 72 computer frames, and then you go through 144 crystal frames. Yes. So when you get to high correlation line interference, your satellites disappear. Boom. Just like that. So if they disappear, that means in position your clockings disappear. Whoa. After that comes into correlation lines of attraction, it opens all signals, modifications, center, and position locations. So you can use the seconds, minutes, and hours and have no seconds, minutes, and hours. Just be yourself location setting. But your satellites will disappear. Okay? Because you understand the time, you understand the space, the time, correlation, you understand the space list of time, you understand the correlations of time, the panels of time, track locations of time, dimension lines, interference locations, the galactic line communications, the magnetic line communications, the mecha universe location of setting, all through travel communication lines and navigation. Done by commission. That's your satellite. All right, setting position lines of core and line communication setting. Now, this is an overlying cycle and correlation lines of attractions, right? This overrides everything in track line communication setting and travel, right? This is an XT billion, 1 billion line cycle in frame of 3-line core line settings of satellites set up in track locations and position locations of 2 measures of XT,000 calculation. Hoo-ah! All right. How's everybody doing so far? One, eh? Really understand all formation lines of ground communication to position all through 144 platform, right? Zara, how you doing? Right? All through platform. Okay. So you have to have really understanding how to travel correlation setting calculation, modify how XT,000 comes in informations because they have alignment with everything, infinity of everything in set locations and all track locations and how you see yourself through teleportation, people. Teleportation. Look at that. Okay. Powerful stuff. All right. In that line communication, the inventory strengthens the line screen. Now, position lines of travels, points lines of data, process calculation lines. Now we go into hard lines of coding. Gets a lot more complicated now because we're adding correlation lines of attractions. All right. Direct lines of panel, 1 signal, 1 rotation surface, platitude line screen. 1 platform, 1 cycle, and 2 correlation lines of attractions, right? Now, direct lines of signals, electrical lines of wire, cross-line signal, and set locations, right? Now, the platitude line screen, the more you come into 1 signal, okay, track locations of 1 signal, track locations of 1 signal, and track locations of 1 signal comes into a plasma. That's the indication lines of 4 track locations, right? Starting with the 1, the 1, the 1, the 1 of 4-line communication of waves and track locations. Direct lines of signals, 4 track location lines of data, routes, lines, communication lines, 1 single line rotation surface, and 2 patterns line rotation cycles, correlation track interference, high calculation line and center. Satellites of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 traction. 10 tracking lines of satellites of 2 platforms, 8 communication lines of 4 set locations of waves and center calculations. Points lines of graph communication. Done my equation. All right. The center communication view is setting line calculation screen lines. This opens all signals and modification of center interference. So let's go through 48 lines of channels. Okay, that's 40 box screens, right? 40. Setting line communication equals lines of 8 set location, right? So that puts lines of 40. Line communication equals lines over pi. Arrow calculation setting, power, interactions, in supply, in track locations, in CPU, in line condition settings, equals 8 in track location. Okay? Powerful stuff, isn't it? All right. So the more you go higher in the inventory, the more you understand how to use higher levels of view through travel, right? Because it's all different levels of frequencies, right? Getting that position lines of correlation setting, you understand how to set up your location setting, location your satellites, right there in attractions. Okay? All right. Platform, communication, ground settings, data highways, line conditions, 3-line rotation, surface attraction. 2 operation lines XT1000 on standby, assigning them rotating line position to program. Okay, so inventory, stat on quo, DOS on the docket. And this is where it comes into backup servers. 2 panels, core set location and channels, operation line circles, operation line surface, and a half pipe and track location. All right. So getting direct line signals, you have to understand how to navigate the XT1000 screen lines in your iCycles. Pattern one goes this way and travels, but the other one goes cross line, open this portal and goes this way and travel. Points, lines, and graphs, 1 signal, 1 operation line service, cross line signals out through equation. Okay. So you have to understand the in and out exits. Very powerful stuff, how it comes into wind factors of galaxies, the shifts, the anomalies, the line rotation surface of a black hole and track location. Okay. So that's why you have to understand there's no limited access on anything that you do. Everything is infinitum, affinitum, affinitum. 3-track location of 1 plus 1 equals lines of 3, 3-line communication setting, 6 lines of 9, track location equals lines of Earth, line communication height rotation surface, character modify, line communication setting, in track locations to CPU, and travel correlation. That's how it works. All right, set correlation line calculation setting, there's the pyramid. There's the mountain. All right. Everything is a single line correlation lines of symbolism. Symbiotic units, correlate line and interference, high correlation lines of directions, H line centers, platforms of 2 lines of 4 set location. You got to understand how to change the core centers in line communication setting to an H. Process communication of 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location platforms. Now, direct calculation, we got an XT1000 here, okay, on position, and then we got an XT3000 on position, and then we got an XT4000 on position, right? All through platform, all through communication setting, right? All through process, all through their hangars, all through cross location setting, right? Waiting on standby, right? But they need platforms, okay? They need their dockings. Because once they get their dockings and correlation line interference, they come out of equations, they core their track interference, and they set up the box frames, main frames as square roots and travel point lines and graph calculation system. They expand your mind in position of process at calculation. Hoo-ah! Okay? All right. Getting the line centers in traffication system is understanding how to use the bracket communication lines into hangars of communications, brackets and hangars. All right? Correlation lines of 0, correlation lines of 2 track locations, right? XT1000 comes in, track location, XT1000 comes in, track locations, right? Division, right? Coming in line calculation setting, graph line calculation line expands the line communication setting position of its program. Okay? Expands the minds of all communication setting of its program. Okay? Expands the mind in all location location of its program. Okay? So now you send the platforms and line communication setting brackets, lines of hangars, connection lines of 2 waving cycles, core track provision lines of 3-line position, or track position of center core system and center calculation line setting to 1 XT1000 track location. Okay? All right. So getting cycles and lines of interference, once you understand how to coordinate these things, everything gets a lot more easier through process of platforms and communication setting. Starting with the 144, right? Locking centers at 144 puts everything in correlation setting attractions. So 144 lines equals lines of correlated line interference. Let's go through 50 line communications. Now we're going to wait on signal of the 27 lines of seconds and 2 lines zeros in rotation. And we're going to add 19 in cycle and 8 in measure and correlation lines of traction. Sets communication lines highest interference. If you guys set an 8 there, you got to set it on space. You got to split lines of anomaly, communicate lines of equal line, correlation lines of half calculation, screen lines, adaptation lines of 8-track location. Send correlation lines of 4 8-line rotations, bracket calculation lines at 2 8-line rotations, 1 indicate line interference, bracket communication lines, singular lines, and 8 rotation surface and traction. Direct lines of communication lines of 19 volume, sets lines of 2-track lines, 7 location system, add line connections of 4 equals lines of 3-track location of 7 lines of measure, sets communication line interference of 144 platform, 244 platform, 344 platform communication lines of screen. And direct line sending us all communication lines of its mountain track locations. Signal lines, one singularity, one graph, one rotation, one router, and 4 line signals in line communication setting to a crop circle and line connection setting a travel calculation. Done by equation, right? Now, this is an xt trillion. This is an xt trillion square root. Xt trillion square root. All through process, all through communications, all through navigation, all through drawing of schematics. Okay? Very powerful what you guys are coming into. All right, sending communication in your inventories and understanding graph calculation screen is all levels of view, and it's all communication when it comes into platforms of expansion of what Zero is talking about. Expansion is everything. It's the longitude, it's the latitude, and your position locations, right? You just come into expansion. That's all it is. Circulation, rotations, center core lines are 3 triangulation. Merkaba, right? So you stand in the position location this way, okay, in track locations. Let's start with you, location center, right? And then you start in the position locations, again, on the track calculation lines. You start in this location. So you got lines of 4 line signals. You have to travel on all different lines of formation screen. Get in that communications setting, right? Process communication lines of north, process communication lines of north, process communication lines of north. Travel point lines of graph, upside down, upside signal, upside location center, and travel point lines of graph communication. And track locations, right? It's all levels of shadows, correlating the high interference, and lines of tubing, ground line centers, center correlation setting, and 3 track location. Okay? So you got to see yourself from here and you got to see yourself below, right? But the center core system never separates the system. That's where it comes into light, shades, and shadows and traction. Okay? Getting into that position, you truly understand how to use that in all formations. You can do a 3 ground cycle, okay, into navigation lines, into constant correlation lines, into capsule communication screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. 3 angle points, 3 core lines, centers of ground communication to a surface. So there's all different ways to travel, right? All 4 line cycles in track location. Your inventory line ground is a communication lines of service. So you have one here, you have a one here. So it's lines of communication setting, right? Sets communication lines of 2 panels and correlation lines of tractions. One's out, one's in. One's out, one's in, right? One's out, one's in. See how that works? Over cross, over line, over relay, calculate lines over drive, override. See how it processes through, and one doesn't. So that's one case in lines, high center interference, cross line signals, over cross location setting of center operation. Directing lines of correlation setting, crosses lines of 1 indicate 1 arrow on track location. Direct calculation line screen sets lines of 2 panels and rotation surface. Sets lines of 3, 4 lines of pi correlation. Runways, track lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings. Here's the highway. Boom. See it? Then you have the platforms, 1, 2, and 3 track location. Okay? Really interesting when you come into that formations, right? Understand what's going on with you through travel navigations all through the mind. How to process this is all carefully modified. X2000 comes in platforms and track locations, and they land, and they dock, and they expand more levels of you in the mind. But they need platforms. If you don't have platforms, you're not in your position in your binaries or core track location provisions. It's really simple to understand how to see yourself in correlation lines of tracks, right? You can't go through this line conditions anymore. You got to go through this, and you got to cross. You got to go this, and you got to cross. Cross that creates the platform, creates the center, creates the position of space. That's all it is, right? Position of space. Okay? Positions of space. Okay? Positions of platforms of space in set location. Okay? Simple, right? So understanding direct and redirect gets you into panel communication screen lines. You have a better conversation piece when you come in all travel and communication setting to its navigation system through its intelligence. But you have to understand how to go through right over left, left to right, so you can set up the platform, right? Set up the platform. X2000s have a platitude screen lines up talking. Then they expand, right? And so what they do, they distribute lines of communication setting. They open up more lines of communication in your cortex. That position lines symbiotic line screen to your inventories, puts all levels of process of communications And it just comes in all levels of expansion in the mindset calculation. Okay? Done by equation, right? We're done. All right. All right. See you in 5.